Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Clark, and today I'll be presenting on art therapy and the healing power of creativity, and also different ways that we can implement art therapy into our everyday practice with clients. First and foremost, I wanted to ask everyone listening, when was the last time you created something from scratch? Imagine it in your mind's eye, and also think about the experience that provided. Maybe even consider some of the emotions that come up. Do you have pride in what you created? Are you embarrassed? Do you want to redo it? A lot of emotions can be tied to art and the whole process of creating art. Moving on to the definition of art, this definition says that it is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as a painting or a sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty and emotional power. So I really enjoyed this definition of art. There are many out there, but this one does highlight the pride that we can receive from creating art and creating something from scratch. And it does connect to our emotions. So that's going to be vital when working with our clients. So the art therapy origins, I wanted to briefly touch on the history. It was established by Adrian Hill in the early 1940s, and it was used as a process in therapy to enhance a client's overall well-being. So initially, it was used with individuals who had tuberculosis, and then once they saw positive results, they expanded that into new demographics, such as cancer patients, PTSD clients, and then even older individuals who are going through later life transitions. But we do have to remember when working with any client that it's all about the process and not the product. So we do want to encourage the experience to be rich rather than the final result. There are also additional creative art therapies that you can implement. So if your client is not responding too well to the modalities that we'll touch on today, there's also dance movement therapy, music therapy, and even drama therapy. So there's something out there, and there's a creative exercise for everyone, and it's just about finding what works best for your client. But the real question is, what do they all have in common? Well, all of these modalities are a language without words. Art is the universal language, and it's been used since prehistoric times. As we see in this photo right here, this is the decorated Cave of Pont d'Arc, and it's located in the south of France. This is the earliest known and best preserved drawings in the world. You could find yourself there on your next holiday and go check out the museum to witness these amazing and almost ancient forms of artwork. And then art does so much for us. So it connects us to past cultures and relays the history. We can catch a glimpse of what life was like at that time and learn and absorb their stories. It's also a means of connecting and understanding your client. So many times your client may not have the words to express what they've gone through, and processing that trauma can be very difficult. So having art as an experimental and nonverbal form can be incredibly healing throughout the therapeutic process. It also can be very spiritually expressive if that's something that your client is interested in. It encourages self expression beyond any language. So it might access feelings that words cannot capture or something that a client can't label just yet. It could bridge that gap and get them to a place of healing. It also encourages the client to explore beyond their comfort zone. So instead of feeling like they really have to put themselves out there verbally, they can be far more expressive and go beyond their comfort limits. Next, I want to touch on the methods of art therapy. So there's many different methods, and like I said, we want to tailor those to our client and what's going to best help them and suit their therapeutic process. But there's drawing, we have sculpting, you can use Play-Doh with kiddos, there's painting, mandala coloring, crafting, forms of collage to create vision boards, and also digital art because we are in a very new age world where we can incorporate AI and photography into artistic endeavors. So it's really just finding what your client is into, what piques their interest, and what's going to be best for them in the room. So how does this help the client? So creativity will be at work throughout sessions, and it will really help to explore feelings that they may not be able to label yet. It could reconcile emotional conflicts that they haven't had time to process. It also fosters greater self-awareness. And then, as I previously mentioned, it addresses trauma in a more neutral way, and it can separate the client from that experience in itself. So it can be extremely beneficial in working through those past traumas. It also reduces anxiety. Just the action of creating something is known to relieve stress. And then it can also increase that self-esteem as you create a wonderful final product that you can carry with you and take home to reflect on. So some demographics that really benefit have been adults with trauma and also children on the autism spectrum. So research does show that clients with PTSD respond very well to art therapy. Overall, this decreases symptoms of depression, dissociation, even some flashbacks. Additionally, any like heightened emotional arousal is kind of tamed, and then it does resolve some anxiety and sleep issues. So this has been very well received among clients with PTSD, and it even reduces avoidant tendencies and emotional numbness. So that avoidance of wanting to talk about any really traumatic experience, it could be solved just through implementing some artistic tactics where they don't have to vocalize that experience, but they can still process it on their own time. So additionally, children with autism have also had a positive response to art therapy practice, and we see this in sensory-based relational art therapy approach, which is the S-BRATA. And this theoretical approach really focuses on the sensory challenges of the child, and it identifies the varying levels of verbal and nonverbal communication skills, and you use those art techniques to strengthen some areas where we want to see growth, we want to see improvement. So the priority is to establish, this is the first priority, is to establish a sense of safety in the room, which means we want to reduce all levels of stress for the child and go at a comfortable pace. This might look like the parent will sit in for the first several sessions before the child even becomes comfortable with you. And then once that trust is established, then we can move on to the application of creative interventions. The second key step would be identifying the child's preferred sensory profile. So this is just to give us a greater awareness of any restrictive or repetitive behaviors that are rituals or habitual for the child. And this will be a guide, and it'll serve as a guide for us on which materials to use and which materials will best suit the interventions. And finally, art acts as a buffer. So the materials itself may soothe and reduce the child's anxiety around the pressures of entering counseling. They might not understand what that means, but when they see some forms of creativity, it might soothe them and reduce the stress of the entire counseling process. We want to make sure our clients are comfortable. And then the third demographic that I really want to touch on are individuals with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. So art therapy has really been proven to be beneficial with older individuals going through these late in life transitions. Um, we find that it actually is well suited for individuals who have AD, Alzheimer's disease, because the brain relies on the procedural memory that is relatively preserved in Alzheimer's disease. AD patients can learn new motor skills and cognitive and perceptual skills, which are applied to art. So it engages multiple brain regions in a flexible way, and it takes the pressure off of having to remember something. Art, there is no bounds to art. You can create anything, and it's not right, it's not wrong, it just is. So also, The brain is quite fascinating because sensory and motor cortices support the visual and physical art making. So it's very suited to this demographic. Additionally, I wanted to touch on the limbic system, as it is also relatively intact for people with AD, and it enables this emotional expression and enjoyment through art. And so you can see in this image right on the slide that the limbic system processes and manages emotions, behaviors, motivations, and even might drop some memories. And then that autonomic nervous system. So the limbic system is very important and quite useful in the artistic process. So the second point that really makes individuals with Alzheimer's a suitable target client for this therapeutic modality is that art serves as a medium for emotional expression. And at this time, specifically for individuals who are experiencing forms of dementia, it can be quite isolating. So having this expression of the intense emotional experience without needing the words for it can be very therapeutic in itself. It's a way to organize their thoughts and find discovery and relief. And then finally, art can induce flow. So, what is flow? A flow is a state of intense concentration, satisfaction, and enjoyment. And this is where I'm sure we've all experienced it in some form, whether you're exercising or very into a passion project. Time and the outside life can just slip away. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And this really enhances sense of self and purpose, leading people to claim, I feel like a human again. And that's what we want for our patients, right? So I found this additional article that was very interesting. And since we do highlight some spirituality at Genesis, I wanted to touch on art therapy and how you can express that spiritual element. And this also promotes a holistic approach, which we like to take with our clients. We want to view them as a whole individual, not just a person with a label. We don't want isolated incidents of their life. We want a view of the whole picture so we can truly understand them. And then art pairs very well with this because it is intrinsically spiritual and intimate by nature. It fosters that spiritual reconnection, and this does not mean that the client must be religious in order to find this to be a spiritual process. Every single person has a spirit and some sense of self. So it could be just reconnecting with one sense of self. I also really enjoyed this take as it fights against the Western tendency to compartmentalize ourselves. We're a very individualistic society where we like to categorize the elements of our life, whether it's family, work, social life, if we even economics, politics, we love to put categories and labels on things. But this one article, the author, Circa, believes that this categorization of experiences actually detaches and divides us from gaining complete comprehension of ourselves. And then she claims this actually leads to more mental illness. So, really, by trying to divide our lives up into these set forms and figures, we're really not able to connect with ourselves. So, art therapy breaks down the barriers, it has no limits. So, we can integrate all aspects of our lives and address them all as one. This is also proven to be pretty multiculturally appropriate. As you can incorporate ritualistic practices, storytelling, and I know for some indigenous demographics, they used wood carvings in one of the articles that I read up on. So it's very fascinating and it can be applied to many diverse cultures and many diverse clients. Finally, we want to talk about how we can enhance our competency. So, while we may not be trained in art therapy, there's still some ways that we can implement it in an ethical manner. So, overall, we want to increase our perceptual abilities. We want to be aware of the client and their experience and observe if they're verbally responding or if they're not verbally responding to this activity. If they are shut down and feel uncomfortable, we want to take note of that and move forward in an appropriate way. We also want to make sure that the therapeutic alliance is strengthened throughout the process. So we don't want to make this our art therapy session. We want to assess what's going to be most helpful for the client. And we also want to be present and engaged. We don't want to get wrapped up, even if we're working with a young child or an adult who is experiencing this artistic expression. Even if we're working alongside them, we want to make sure we're remaining focused on them and that this is their time. Also, we want to work on our flexibility. So if they're not connecting to the activity, how can we redirect? Can we incorporate other therapeutic forms, such as that music, movement, and mindfulness techniques that were touched on earlier? And finally, we want to be ethical and maintain ethical and professional boundaries. So this can be a very overwhelming process for the client. So we want to make sure that we're sending them off into the world and they're leaving the session in a healthy manner and they don't have unresolved emotional turmoil as best as we can. I know we can't always control this, but we do want to assess for safety and well-being before we let them leave the session. And then finally, I wanted to provide some local resources. American Art Therapy Association is a wonderful website that will really tell you everything you need to know about art therapy and even some fallacies to look out for. So that is super helpful. Therapist Aid has some actual artistic tools that you can print off and work with clients. They're free, and I believe this includes mandalas and other activities. And then Art Van Gogh, I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but they're a wonderful local resource who works with children coming from abusive homes, and they integrate artistic and therapeutic elements when working with these children to help them heal and thrive when they move forward in life. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation on art therapy. I would love to receive any feedback so that I can expand my knowledge and we can grow together. But thank you so much for listening in.